All right, welcome everybody. We are live with author Melody Tyden, and we're going to be discussing her book, Lady in Waiting today. We are streaming this live on Facebook. So if you've got questions, you can drop them there, or if you're on the Zoom call, you can ask them here. And with that, I will go ahead and hand it over to you, Melody.
Thank you very much for having me here. So, Lady in Waiting. This was a story that I had in mind for a really long time. Probably the first romance book I ever read was a historical romance. And I'm talking about like those ones, the paperbacks with the ladies in the dresses and the guys in their white shirts with their chests showing and very dramatic poses, all that sort of thing. And the first one I read was actually when I was staying over at a friend's house for the weekend, and her mom had it out, and I got up in the middle of the night. I couldn't sleep, and I found it on the table in the living room, and I picked it up for something to do, and I basically stayed up all night and read the whole thing. And from then on, I would go to the town library in my little town where I grew up and pick up these same kind of historical romances. And I always just loved it because it's so removed from everyday life, this whole idea of princes and princesses and the things that they had to deal with and no modern conveniences and all that sort of thing. And I just loved that. So I'd always wanted to write something like that. And the first version of this book I wrote almost 20 years ago, probably. I didn't get very far. I used to start a lot of books and not finish them. But the original idea was simply that a prince was contracted to marry a princess, and then somebody tried to kill him, and his brother took his place. And originally, he was going to come to escort her to the wedding. She wouldn't know who he was, but he would know that she was the princess. They would fall in love, of course, and then it wasn't until he got to the wedding that everything would be revealed. But for those of you who've read the book, you'll know that that's not quite how it turned out. We made a few different changes. And one of the big changes was that originally it was the brother behind it all. He was the one who had tried to kill his brother to take his place. But one of the great things about serialized writing and getting feedback from people as you're writing it was that when the character of the brother, Eric, was introduced, everyone was immediately like, well, it can't be him because it's too obvious. And so then I was like, okay, I guess it's not going to be him then, because nobody thinks it's going to be him. So I had to kind of rewrite the whole story in my head as I was writing it and change what was going to happen. And so we ended up with this quite convoluted story of Wesley and his sister Arabella and how they had convinced Eric to take part in their schemes. So that's kind of how it started. I started writing online during the pandemic, sharing my work. Originally started doing paranormal romance, and then I did a few contemporary, and then I was really excited to dig out this historical one and get a chance to really flesh it out and write the story that I had always wanted to write. So that's my basic intro, and I'm happy to answer any questions or talk to you guys about it. I will just mention I've got my cat here. Whenever I talk to the computer, she thinks I'm talking to her, and she's purring quite loudly. I don't know if you can hear it, but if you hear some strange rumbling noises, that's what's going on. She's sitting right beside me, purring loudly. Okay, I've just seen Maureen's question in the chat. Thanks for that. She said, where did I get the inspiration for the characters? So Cordelia, Princess D, she, in the original version, she was much more kind of the damsel in distress, sort of timid medieval princess that we might all think of. But by the time I got around to writing it this time, I didn't want to write about that kind of woman. I wanted to write about somebody who is a bit more, sure of herself, a bit more confident in her own skin. So even though she's living in a time where she's quite restricted and she is forced into this contract, she doesn't just accept it. She still tries to live life on her terms and to have adventures within the confines of what she can do. Cass is, again, just kind of a stereotypical prince for me. At the beginning, he's much more interested in being with the guys, being out hunting, running the kingdom, not looking for love, but he's kind of blown away when he meets Dee, who he doesn't know is the princess. So it was really their story, these two characters who find each other, who appreciate each other for who they are without knowing who they are. So there's a scene where Cass asks Dee, once they do know who each other is, what she would have thought of him if they had met under the circumstances in which they were originally supposed to meet. And she tells him honestly that, she would have probably had a much lower opinion of him, but it's the fact that they get to meet not knowing each other and actually get to know each other on a personal level first before finding out that they are actually betrothed to each other. That was what I think made their connection really special and made the story interesting for me. Yeah. Maureen's just said, I love that she's such a tomboy. She's not the princess, she's out shooting arrows and getting sticks in her hair the first time we meet her. And she's racing Cass on her horse and she's not sitting back and letting things happen to her at all. I really love that about her too. So Carolyn's asking, with so many different stories, how do I decide which one to write first? That's a tough one. And that's why I'm usually writing more than one book at a time. I've got a list where I keep all of my ideas, just really, really, really rough story ideas. And I kind of think about them as I'm working on other things. And then when I'm getting to the end of a book that I'm working on, I really just kind of take a look at my list and see which one is speaking to me the most and which one I want to focus my attention on. When I first started writing online, I pretty much had the book written before I started sharing it. And then as I got a little more confident in my ability to keep writing every day and to keep the story going, because as I said at the beginning, I used to start a lot of books and not finish them. So I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to get into a book and then lose interest or find that I didn't know how it was going to end. So I tried to write as much of it as possible before I shared it. But I'm at the point now where I'm really writing day to day. I share chapters today that I wrote yesterday. And it's scary in some ways, but it's also really great to get the feedback from people as I'm writing, because I do change things based on the feedback. Somebody will say, well, why didn't this happen? Or why did she do this? And it's great because I can go in and add something in the next chapter to explain, I didn't explain that well enough. So now I can go in and add something. I do still, obviously, these are all first drafts when I post them. But, and so when I go back and edit them afterwards, I will add some things in, a bit of foreshadowing for things that I didn't necessarily know were going to happen the first time that I wrote it. But the stories stay pretty much the same from the first draft to the end. It's just some fine tuning and some tweaking that goes into the final edits. And then I get to the end of the book and I take a look at my list again and see which one I want to do next.
Hi,
But I found
Melody.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. And you?
Very good, thank you.
So I wanted to ask about your historical romances. I know you're planning a third book in this series, but do you have any other historical romances planned?
Not at the moment, no. I've really been focused on the contemporary stuff lately, which I really enjoy as well. And this book, Lady in Waiting, was only supposed to be a standalone. It was never meant to be a series.
Yeah, that's how it starts.
But I mean, I got to the end, I'd written 110,000 words and Wesley Easton was still at large. And so it became pretty clear there was going to have to be a second book to deal with him. But I really started the second book thinking, okay, this is it. I'm going to wrap everything up here. But then we got the character of Zara introduced, and we got Eric getting a bit of his redemption arc. And again, the book just got too long, and I thought there's no way I can wrap it up and do it justice. So now there's going to be a third book. I believe that will be the last one, but I have said that before. So
yeah, we'll see it in number 6. But I really enjoyed the different forces that you brought in for this book. So like Zara being, very exotic from a faraway land, and being very different from everyone else. And although I miss Dee and Modi, it was nice to see a different side to that royalty that you write about. So when I was asking about your historic romance, I love historic romance, and it's great to see someone writing about something like that on Dream, because it's not there's not much of it, is there, on Dream? But I was interested in seeing whether a historic romance that wasn't royalty based would be on your agenda.
That could be very interesting. Yeah, I mean, we tend to focus on the royalty stuff because it's, very dramatic with power struggles and everything. But I love just learning about history. I'm a huge history buff to begin with. So one of my favorite things about living in England, and part of the reason why I moved to Europe in the first place, was just that there is so much history here. And I love, when there's not a pandemic on, I love going out to, historic houses and seeing the way that people used to live and all that sort of thing. So I definitely have interest in it. At the moment, I don't have any plans, but we'll see. I mean, with the third book in this series, I'm really excited to go to a different country and look at what life was like there, because although the countries in Lady in Waiting and King in Training are made up, they are very much European based. So with the third book, we'll be going to somewhere that's going to be kind of loosely based on the Ottoman Empire, set kind of in North Africa. I don't want to really specify too much in case I get historical details wrong, but it's going to be a very different society from what we've seen in the first 2 books. So I'm excited about that, and I think it's going to be really interesting to explore what that's like and what the dynamic between men and women in that place is like as well. So I'm not ruling out further historic romance, but I think this one will be the last in this particular series.
Awesome.
So Caroline's just followed up with her question I've seen in the chat, saying, so you don't really plan your books, but rather make it up as you go. Pretty much, yeah. I do have an outline that I start with. The first thing I write when I get the books is I write a really, really brief synopsis, like 2 or 3 paragraphs. So I know the beginning of the story, I know the end of the story, and I maybe know a few major plot points in between. And then I sit down and I write character sheets. So this is really basic stuff. So what they look like, because I didn't do that at first, and I'd get halfway through a book and I'd be like, I can't remember what color this character's eyes are. And I'd have to go back through my notes and, reread the book and try to find the place where I first described them. So now I do that right at the beginning. I write, a really brief physical description of them, and then key points about their background and their character arc for the story. And then from that, I don't, like, some writers really plot out everything and have like an outline for each chapter, but I don't do that. I sit down to write the chapter with an idea of where the chapter is going to end, and then I just kind of let it flow from there and see how we get to that point. And sometimes it doesn't work and I have to scrap the chapter and start over, but most of the time I do end up where I thought I was going to end up at the end of that chapter. So it can be stressful at times when, because sometimes the words just don't want to come. And my husband's constantly telling me that I'm putting all this pressure on myself for no reason. But I also am a person who just naturally works well with a deadline. I am more motivated when I know that I have to do something at a particular time. If you tell me I've got a year to write the book, I'll be writing it in the 12th month of that year. So forcing myself to update every day and to write every day is the best way for me to make sure that I actually do write something and not just keep putting it off. Maureen's asked if I needed to do a lot of research to build this world. Not overly, partly because I didn't set it in any particular place. And I did that on purpose so that I didn't need to adhere to any historical facts. So if I had said, that it was in 14th century Ireland, then if I mentioned something that wasn't appropriate to that time, somebody could easily say, that didn't happen in Ireland at this time. So that's part of the reason why I made up the countries that they live in. And I did do some research. So things like there's a scene where Zara takes something from Arthur and she has to hide it somewhere on her person. And so I'm sitting there Googling, did pockets exist in the 15th century? Because I wasn't sure. And it turns out, no, they didn't. So I had to have her with a pouch around her waist that she could put this thing into because she wouldn't have had pockets. So I do some research that way, but as I said, I'm a bit of a history buff to begin with. So I have a general knowledge of what life was like at that time. It's just those kind of little specific things that I'll look up if I'm not sure, because I don't want to be wildly historically inaccurate. Caroline's asking what's the weirdest thing I've had to Google. Well, for those of you who've read Tinsel Temptation, I Googled some very strange things for that book. Probably none of them are. Now Emma's saying she knows the answer. I'm curious what she thinks the answer is. The weirdest thing.
Several things it could be.
Yeah,
I thought it was the set of 3 one.
I have had to look up some things for set of 3 as well.
The one that your husband walked in on.
My husband often finds me looking up odd things or giggling over things that aren't really appropriate, but he's gotten used to that by now. He just shakes his head and walks away. I honestly can't think what the weirdest thing is. I mean, I've looked up ways to kill people. I've definitely looked up sexual positions. So yeah, my Google search history is probably a little scary if anybody ever went back through and tried to look at all the things I'd looked up.
What is your favorite part of a story or of Lady in Waiting?
I think my favorite scene in Lady in Waiting is definitely the official consummation of their marriage. It just really makes me giggle to think about them in this bed with the curtains drawn and the witnesses outside in the room listening to them. And Dee is understandably uncomfortable with this and doesn't want to have sex with these other people in the room listening to them. And so they fake it. And I just love the two of them being very over the top about it and teasing each other as they were doing it. And then, laughing at the end, and these poor witnesses not having a clue what was going on behind the curtain. So that scene really just made me chuckle. And every time I read back through it, it just makes me smile. And I love the scene in the cave with them where they finally admit to each other who they are, because we had such a build up to that moment. I mean, it's halfway through the book before they finally figure out that they are the people who they are. So it was a lot of pressure for me to try to get that moment right. And I really debated whether or not they should sleep together before that information came out or not, because I didn't want it to feel like Cass was taking advantage of her because, he knows that he is supposed to be marrying the princess. So I really wanted to make Dee the one who kind of takes charge there and insists that he takes advantage of her, basically, so that it's her choice. She's taking full responsibility for it. And then they have this wonderful moment afterwards where they finally realize that they are the people who they are meant to be with after all. It's a few more messages in the chat saying the cave. Yeah, I love the cave too, and just the idea that this prince and princess are are out in having their first experience with each other in this cave with no bed and no creature comforts or anything. Just made it more interesting too. There are a couple of things that I that didn't get explored as much as I would have liked, which is one of the downfalls of writing, of posting as you're writing. For Charlotte, for instance, Dee's sister, I felt her story kind of got dropped a little bit, and I had intended to bring her back in King in Training, but then the action very quickly left the castle. They went on the road to try to track down Wesley, and it didn't make sense to take her with them. So that whole storyline kind of got dropped, and I'm not sure if there's going to be a way to bring it back in the third book, because again, they're not going to be in Slatria at all until the very end. But I hope I can at least give her a little bit of closure at the end of that book, so she doesn't just disappear. So we talked about Dee and we talked about Cass. I also really love Melody as a character. I think she's such a fun contrast to Dee in that she's so proper and so well behaved, whereas Dee's the complete opposite. And she kind of gets dragged along on these adventures with Dee because she's got no choice. But then I really loved how she gradually gets more brave as time goes on. And then the second book, especially, we see her really come into her own. So I've enjoyed kind of the growth of her character and seeing her become, not like Dee, but just a little more sure of herself and a little more confident. This question here about what was most difficult to write. I find action scenes really hard to describe. I like the romantic scenes. I find those come really easily to me when I'm getting the flow of writing them, but the action scenes are harder. So there's the scene towards the end where Dee and Lodi have been taken, and Cass and Bran come to rescue them, and they're out in the field, and there's lots of things going on. And I find that really hard to try to kind of capture the tension and the excitement of the moment, and kind of place everybody and do enough descriptions, but also get some dialogue in. And so yeah, those are the most challenging parts for me to write. Emma's asking who my favorite character is. I think it has to be Dee. She's the friend I would like to have. I'm naturally, I think, much more like Elodie, a little bit cautious, a little bit introverted, happier to stay with my book. And and so having friends who kind of drag you along and do that sort, and bring you out of yourself and make you take risks is a great thing. So I think she's a great friend to Lodi. I think she's lots of fun, and obviously I think she's perfect for Cass. So I think she's got to be my favorite. There's a question from Kim about how do I develop the names for my books. So I'm guessing you mean the titles for the books. Titles are a tricky thing. With Lady in Waiting, it was quite easy actually, because, well, I say it was easy. I struggled for a long time about whether to put the hyphens in the words or not, because obviously it has two meanings. It's the position of the lady in waiting, because Dee and Lodi trade places and she becomes the lady in waiting. And in that context, it would have the hyphens in the title. But there's also, it's mentioned in the first chapter that Dee is kind of waiting for her marriage so that her life can really begin, because, you know, she's constrained by the expectations of her at the time, so that she is a lady in waiting to find out what her life is going to be like. And I decided that was the meaning that I wanted to go with, and that's why there are not the hyphens in the title. And then when I write a series, I try to link the titles somehow. So having Lady in Waiting as the first book, then the second book is King in Training. And so the way that I link them is different. So I've got my Mismatched Mates series, for instance, where all of the words start with M, and the first word always starts with Miss. So in that case, you know, by the time I'm now on the third book, and I was trying to think of the title, I literally just sat down with a list of words that started with Miss and another list of words that started with M, and tried to put the two together. And the same thing with my Christmas series. So I had Mistletoe Mistake to start off with, and then Candy Cane Challenge. So then by the third one, again, I was looking at lists of Christmas items and then lists of words that began with the same letter as the Christmas thing, to try to come up with something. So I think for the first book in the series, it is the easiest because I can call it whatever I want, and then I kind of box myself in and have to try to get the other titles to match. I think so far I've done okay with it. We'll see how it goes. The longer the series gets, the more difficult it becomes. I think another thing that was slightly challenging about Lady in Waiting was that the villain, the ultimate villain, who is Wesley Eastham, we never actually see him in the book. He doesn't have any dialogue. He is kind of seen at a distance in one scene, and that's it. Otherwise, he's just kind of this phantom-y presence who other characters talk about, but we never meet him. So it was a little difficult, a little interesting to try to make him seem like a formidable villain when we don't actually get to see him at all. There's a question about whether I already have the title for the third installment of Lady in Waiting. I do not. I need to get a better idea of the plot before I decide on the title. At this point, I really just have a very loose idea of, you know, where we're starting and where we're ending off. But I need to plot it out a little bit more before I come up with the title. Emma's asking about Patreon. So yeah, I have been sharing my books. So when I first started writing online, I actually was on Good Novel, and I shared my first 3 books there. And then I decided to try writing with Dream instead, and I shared 20 books on Dream as I was writing them. But my next book and all my upcoming books are all going to be shared on Patreon instead. And there's a few reasons for that. I think as anybody who's here as part of Resurgence Novels knows, there are a lot of problems with Dream and with many of the online platforms, both in the reader experience and in the author experience as well. I've never signed any of my books with any of the online platforms because I have problems with the things that they're not doing particularly well. So I've decided to share my books on Patreon instead, which is a subscription-based platform where people sign up and pay a monthly fee to have access to the content that I share there. The books will all still be available on Amazon when I've completed them. But for people who enjoy the process of reading them as I'm writing them, they can join me on Patreon, and it still keeps me accountable. As I talked about, it still gives me that deadline, so I have to keep writing, which is a good thing for me. I need to put that pressure on myself or I wouldn't do it. So where do I get the ideas, inspiration for the plots? Honestly, from anywhere. It can be anything. So I'm working on a fantasy series. It's a 4-book series, and it came from watching Star Wars, which I did with my husband during the first lockdown here in the UK. I'd never seen them before. And one of the characters in particular, I just started thinking about his character after we finished watching the movie, and now I've written 4 books out of that. My figure skating books, again, I'm a big figure skating fan. I followed the sport for a long time, and there are lots of stories about couples in pairs and ice dance and kind of the behind the scenes drama that goes on. So it just came really out of that and thinking about what kind of troubles a couple could go through. Sometimes I'll be reading another book and I kind of like something that happened in the book, but it doesn't become a big plot point in that book, or they take it in a different direction than I would want to go. So, I just think about how I would have written it instead and kind of spin it off into something different. When I was writing Lady in Waiting, I actually had a reader make a comment to me. She's like, I like this take that you're doing on an arranged marriage, but I'd really like to see you take on a story where the characters have to get married when they don't want to. And so I said I would give it a try, and I thought about it, and out of that came a work of art. So it really can come from anywhere. And as Em and I were talking about earlier, it's really easy once you have the story to find a way to extend it, to keep it going in another book. It's actually, I find it harder to close off the story completely and say, no, that's definitely it. I'm done with these characters for good. I'm working on that so that I don't end up with an unending list of books to be written. And that leads into Kim's question in the chat saying, do I always plan my books to be a series, or does the IA come up at the end of the first book? There are very few actually that I planned to be a series. The first books that I wrote on Good Novel, which are on Amazon now, that was always meant to be a trilogy because I had kind of 3 different ideas for the same set of characters. And I just sat down and wrote them back to back. Some of my books, like the Cold Lake Pack series on Dream, the first book ends with a happy ever after for some of the characters and not the others. So I pretty much always knew that was going to be, there was going to be at least a second book to that too, and to give everybody a happy ending. But other ones, I really didn't expect it to go. Like I said, with Lady in Waiting, it was supposed to be a one-off, and then it was definitely supposed to finish in the second book. And now there's going to be a third book. So sometimes the characters just are not done talking to me. They still want their story to continue, and I just have to go with it. My cat is back purring again, so if you can hear her, I don't know. She's very loud to me, but I don't know if it comes through the mic.
So I don't know if this was asked or if you were if you had talked about this, but do you sometimes write like multiple books like at the same time, or like do you stick to one, or like how does that work for you?
I'm usually writing at least 2 books at a time.
Okay.
Yeah, I actually find it easier. I find it because if you get stuck on something and you're just writing the one book, it can be really hard to get unstuck. And I find just taking a break and thinking about something else really helps to clear my mind and to help me come up with a way to get past whatever is blocking me. And so having 2 books going at the same time, if I get stuck with one, then I can just go over to the other one and work on that one instead. And then, my brain is still going away in the background as I'm working on one, trying to figure out whatever the problem was in the other one. I usually try to make sure that they're quite different from each other.
Right.
So I'll be writing one contemporary and one paranormal or something like that, so that, there's no danger of getting confused about the plots of the characters or anything like that. But I find it really does help to have 2 different things that I can work on.
That's amazing.
And I was saying in the chat,
Yeah.
it takes me about 6 weeks generally to write the book once I start, because I do write every day. So I'll try to write what works out to a chapter on Dream, which is about between 1,500 and 2,500 words. So I'll write that every day on that book. So then by the time 6 weeks are up, then the book is finished. But yeah, I am doing that, and I'm working full time, and I've got a young daughter, and I'm editing stuff at the same time. So it is a lot. I don't sleep a great deal. And Maureen has asked what advice I would give to aspiring authors. Just write, really. The first books that I wrote, my trilogy that I wrote, it's not fantastic. I'll be the first to say that. I've actually been rewriting it, with all my spare time. I've been going back and rewriting it because I read it a year after I published it, and it felt stilted. It felt, it didn't flow well. Some of the word usage was a bit odd. And at the time, I thought it was perfectly fine. So just the more you write, the more you learn, and the more naturally it comes. So I'm looking back at my first books to now, I can definitely see a big difference. And I hope that only gets better as I go. So my advice is just to write, and to not be afraid. It can be really, really scary to put your work out there. And people are not always kind. But, I've learned a lot too from the feedback that I've gotten, which is the really great thing about writing on these platforms where people can give feedback. Because when you put a book on Amazon, somebody buys it, they read it maybe one time out of 100, they'll leave a review. But then even then, it's just usually a few lines. So to get the feedback on every chapter every day is really one of the great things about the online platforms as an author. And I think it's a really great thing for a reader too, because normally when you read a book, you don't get to chat with the author about it as you're reading it. So I think that's a really great relationship that these online platforms have enabled from both sides. Caroline's asking, which of my characters do I feel hasn't really gotten to tell their story properly? Ooh, that's a good question. In this series, in the Lady in Waiting series, it's definitely Charlotte. She's got an interesting story to tell, and it's kind of been pushed to the side. I don't know if it's enough to sustain a book on its own, but I would definitely like to know more about her. in the first trilogy that I wrote, there was a character who, is a villain, the bad guy, comes in and does a bunch of things and then is killed off. But we never really find out why she did anything that she did. So that's actually one of the things that I'm looking forward to with Patreon, is that I've got an option for people who subscribe where they can request bonus chapters for any of my books. So if there was something they wanted to know more about, or if they wanted a different point of view on a certain event that happened, they can ask me to write it, and I will write it for them. And one of them has actually said, that she wants a point of view of this villain from the first trilogy. And I'm actually really excited to write that because I haven't explored her motivations and why she did everything that she did. So it's going to be interesting for me, and hopefully for the readers as well. Emma's asking, is it M? Yes. Yeah, so it's the villain from the second book, The Returned Mate. So for those of you on Patreon, you'll get to see what she was thinking when all of that was going on. I do find the villain's point of view really interesting, and I haven't done a lot of it. In my book, The Alpha's Prey, there are the 3 points of view. There is the heroine, Caitlin, the hero, Evan, and then Evan's father, Seth, who is the villain. And throughout the whole book, I had his point of view. And I really liked writing his point of view, actually, because he is so twisted and his reasoning, is so ridiculous, but he convinces himself that he's right. And so I found that really, really interesting. And I'd like to do more from the villain's point of view. And I'm sort of doing that in the new book that I'm writing on Patreon right now, which is the third book in my Mismatched Mate series. So we're taking one of the villains from the first book, Jared, and we're getting his point of view for the first time in this book. So I'm really excited to explore what he's thinking and why he does the things he does. So Nell's asking if there's a certain writing style, first or third person, that I prefer. I never actually wrote in first person until I started writing on these platforms. I'd always written third person before. And the fantasy series that I'm working on is written in third person. And I had sent it to various beta readers when I first wrote it. And the feedback that I got was that the story was really, really interesting, but they thought it was lacking emotion, that they couldn't connect with how the characters were feeling. And I think that's something that writing in first person has really helped me to develop, because when you put yourself in the character's shoes and you're trying to explain to the readers how they're feeling, you really have to think about it more than if you're just describing what's happening to that person. So it's not to say that you can't do that in third person. You absolutely can. I just wasn't doing it. And now I think that I've got the practice of writing it in first person. I know better how to bring that into the third person as well. I think for romance, first person works really well because it is so much about the emotion and you want to feel what the character's feeling. But I'm still writing this fantasy series and I plan to keep it in third person because I do like it better for that. So I think it depends on the book. It depends on the overall feel of the book, which works better. But for my romance, I think I'll be sticking to first person primarily. And Caroline's asking, with all of the writing that I do I still have time to read? Not as much as I would like, but I do still try to. And right now I'm mostly reading romance because it is a great way to learn, is to read other people's writing and, to see what makes me connect with a character, what it is in the writing that appeals to me. And then hopefully I can learn from that and incorporate that into my own writing as well. I've been reading a lot of kind of contemporary rom-com type romance. My own books are, sort of in that style. they're definitely light romance, as opposed to kind of the dark stuff that we see a lot of the time. So, I'm looking at reading writers that are very successful in that, and, trying to learn from them and just enjoying their stories as well, because they're so much fun. But that's also an example of what I was talking about, sometimes getting inspiration from reading something where I didn't like the way that it went. So I started reading kind of triad romances, so where there's three people in the relationship. And I didn't really like the way that often it was, kind of two people were in the relationship and then the third person came in and somebody was unhappy with it. And that's kind of where the drama came from, or somebody got jealous about the relationship. And I'd always just get annoyed. There'd be some kind of misunderstanding. And I didn't want that to be where the drama came from. I prefer when the drama is kind of external to the couple, or the triad in this case, and they deal with it together. So that really kind of inspired me to try to write my own triad romance, which I'm doing right now with a set of three. And they're having issues, of course, but it's not issues between them. It's things that they're all dealing with, but they deal with it together and they try to work it out together. So I find that generally more interesting than some kind of misunderstanding that drives the couple apart. So I just get frustrated and like talk to each other. I was asking what sort of issues I would like to write about in the future. I do really want to write something with a main character with a disability of some kind. That's something that's kind of close to my heart, because my own daughter has several disabilities. And there is a character in Elk Creek, which is a kind of murder mystery police drama that I wrote many years ago that I have shared on Dream. It's written in third person because at the time I was only writing third person. And there's a character in there who is nonverbal, like my daughter is. But he's not, the main character. And we only get a really brief glimpse of his point of view. So I would like to write something with a main character who has a disability, not necessarily being nonverbal, but just something that that is part of their character, doesn't define them, but is part of their character, and is something that needs to, that they need to deal with in addition to whatever else the drama is going on in the book. I'm trying to be more diverse in my writing. I mean, if you look at most of my early books, all the characters are white and young and attractive. So I am making an effort to try to include other races, other, like in a set of three, we've got Kimber, who's overweight, and just, make it a little bit more representative of society. So it's not the same kind of people that you're writing about all the time. Oh, thank you guys for saying that you could relate to Elk Creek. Yeah. I wrote that when my daughter was quite young, and, we're still coming to terms with the fact that she was likely to be nonverbal for her whole life. So I think it probably comes across a little bit in the bleakness of the parent situation. A lot of awful things happen to their children, and they have to deal with it. And that was, very much my feeling at the time, that things felt a little bit hopeless. And definitely in the nonverbal son's point, when we get his point of view, it still makes me really emotional to read it. But I'm glad to say that although my daughter still is nonverbal, I definitely feel much better about it than I did at that point. But that's the great thing about writing too, is that, sometimes when you're going through something like that, it can be a great way to kind of channel those emotions and put them into something productive rather than just feeling bad about something. And, hopefully it can be something that other people can relate to as well. Yeah, absolutely. Emma's saying it's a good way to process. That's right. We all go through things that are difficult. Nobody's got a perfect, easy life. So giving characters kind of the same struggles they're going through and then helping them find a way over it is kind of inspiring and a way to process the things that you're feeling. Absolutely. But sometimes it's just fun to escape as well. So doing something like Lady in Waiting, which is, there are obviously they've got problems, but in the end, it's mostly just fun, and it's about the relationships and everybody getting their happy ending in the end.
So do all of your stories, I know you mentioned that, do they all have happy endings, or are there any stories where, I know as a writer, it's hard to kill off characters, like, do you go that route, or do you just, make sure everybody is happy and alive and well?
I do struggle with killing off anybody, I have to admit, and I tend to give my villains something redeeming about them in the end. But I do have one romance that the characters don't end up together at the end. I still think it's a happy ending. They both end up in a good place in their lives, but they had this kind of really passionate, short romance that was exactly what they needed, and then they went their separate ways. But I've had lots of people tell me that it makes them cry anyway, even though they end up happy, just not together. I think it's a hard thing in romance because we do want to see the couple end up together.
Right.
But life isn't always that way. So
at least they're happy. So that's important.
Yeah, for sure. Emma's asking what's the worst thing about writing. Really just when the words won't come. Some days I'll sit down and I'll stare at the screen for an hour and I've written 200 words and it's so frustrating. But as the more I do it, the more I come up with strategies to help that. So it can be taking a break, it's going out for a walk, doing something different, having another book on the go or an editing project that I could be working on just to take my mind off of it. And I really just find that when I don't try to force it, when I do something else and just let it tick away in the back of my brain, that a solution will come and then I can get back to it. And there are days, where I end up with my chapter and I'm not thrilled with it. So that's never a great feeling either. I've committed to putting something out and I do put something out, and I'm never happy when I feel like it's not as good as it could have been. But that's what editing is for. You can go back later and make changes once you've moved on in the story. Caroline's asking which of my characters was the most stubborn and just didn't want to do what she planned for them to do. The characters definitely do take on a life of their own sometimes. A story that I like to tell is this fantasy series that I'm writing, which I know is none of you have read it, so I can't go into too much detail, but there is a scene where the main character is at this public place and she comes across someone who's watching her. And when I wrote that scene, it was just supposed to be kind of this random bad guy who worked for the bad people. And I didn't realize until like 4 chapters later that actually I knew who that character was, and he was someone that's important later in the book. And I hadn't realized when I wrote the scene that that was him, but it was him. And he basically just told me, yes, I was the one who was there in that scene. So that, that's just a really strange thing that the characters do just sometimes speak to you and tell you things that you didn't realize. In terms of not wanting to do what I planned for them to do, I found Jackson in the Cold Lake series frustrating at times. He would make all this forward progress and then he takes a step back and does something that's frustrating. But that's just him. That's his character, and he's constantly trying to improve. So I love him for that, even when he does things that make me want to smack him. Oh, thanks, Maureen. I've just seen your message there that you're going. Thank you for being here. So Nell's asking how far ahead I am in the book when I'm writing. It really depends. When I start the book, I usually try to have, at least a week's worth of chapters written so that I can ease into it and everything. But I don't want to write too far ahead, to be quite honest, because the feedback can make such a big difference. And I really found this when I wrote Mismatched Mates. And it was the first book that I really had a lot of people reading along with me every day and commenting. And I had quite a lot of the book written ahead of time, but the comments, made me think about different things. People were speculating on what they thought might happen. And I would read something and be like, oh, that's better than what I was going to do. So I had to kind of go back and rewrite things and change things. And that just got frustrating after a while. So I actually found it was better to not write too far in advance so that I could kind of adapt and change things as it went if something better did come up. That's not to say that I always change things based on the comments. There are lots of times where, I have something in mind and I'm going to do it no matter what, whether people like it or not. And again, going back to the Cold Lake Pack series, there's Aurelia's pregnancy. I know a lot of people didn't like that, but it was part of the wider story. It was something that was going to carry over, was going to have a purpose in the third book. So despite all of the begging comments, saying, please make it Killian's baby, I had to stick to my guns there and go with what I had planned from the beginning. Which character had the biggest development from where I started writing and then from how they ended up? I think, yeah, that's a tough one. There have been quite a few. In a work of art, Nadia was actually a lot meaner originally in my first drafts. And it took, she was a little bit more manipulative, and I think less sympathetic overall. And so that one I changed even before, like the first draft of the first chapter where she and her boyfriend break up. I think you would have felt a lot less sorry for her if you had read the first draft of that, because she really, tried to manipulate him into staying and was just a lot more forceful. And then the same thing when she met Dex, she really kind of almost blackmailed him into agreeing to the fake engagement. So that was something, just as I started writing it on, I was like, I'm not liking this character enough. I don't see why he would like her enough. So I really had to go back and just start over with her, so that she became the person that we got to know in the end. And Oliver as well in Mismatched Mates. He, when we first meet him, he's a bit of a player, and that originally that carried on a bit longer. He wasn't quite so into the relationship with Abby right at the beginning, but again, it didn't quite work. It felt like, and she would actually, Abby was was continuing to do things with Liam even as she was getting to know Oliver, and it just didn't work. It didn't feel like people that you would be rooting for, so that had to change as well. I think I want my characters to be likable, so I have trouble, making them do things that would make people not like them, even though sometimes they have to. And actually, to bring it back to Lady in Waiting, Eric underwent quite a change as well, because he originally was supposed to be the bad guy, and then he became, sort of a pawn. And then by the end of the second book, he's somebody that we're kind of rooting for. So he's gone through quite a bit of growth as well, from where he was meant to be. Yeah. I didn't ever intend to write from his point of view, so it will be interesting in the third book to see who Eric is and to find out more about him. Emma's saying she wanted to hate him. That's good, because originally I wanted you to hate him. But yeah, he was originally supposed to be evil, and then he just kind of turned weak, and now hopefully he's sympathetic and we can all root for him. And I mean, Jackson too, he started out pretty awful, and lots and lots of people hated him in the first book, but I really love to see the comments, by the end of the second book and the third book, saying that they really wanted him to be happy and were happy that he was happy even after everything that he had done. So and Dane too, yes. People have mixed feelings about Dane. Some people love him, and other people think he went too far. Are there any other characters I would like to redeem? Originally, actually, I had thought about doing a sequel to The Alpha's Prey, where Seth gets to earn his redemption. I don't think I will now, because I just have too many other books that I want to write. But it was more of a curiosity on my part to see if he could be redeemed after what he'd done, if I could make people like him in the end. And actually in Blood Donor, it was really a toss-up with Brandon and Dawn, whether I should give them a redemption or not. Obviously I chose not, but I think it could have been possible for either of them, for Dawn more than Brandon probably, but I think it was possible. So like I said, I generally don't like to kill off people, because I like to think that people deserve a second chance generally, but there are some who are just beyond redemption. Emma's asked about my ultimate book boyfriend. Says, is that from my books or just in general?
Yours.
Uh,
Both.
it's so hard. I love them all. It really is tough. I've got a soft spot for Brax, basically because he was the first kind of romantic lead that I wrote. But I love Oliver. I just love how, how steadfast he is and how he's not swayed by, the lies that people tried to tell him, or, the mistakes that Abby made, because she made mistakes. But he just deals with it and he moves on from it, and supports her. And so I love that about him. I love Dex because he's a charmer, and he's so certain that he's not going to love again, but then when he does, it's wholehearted. He doesn't hold back at all. For other books, oh goodness, so hard. I think I said once in my group that my very first book boyfriend had to be Gilbert Blythe in Anne of Green Gables, which I absolutely love those books. And I love Gilbert. I really love, there's Janine Frost has a vampire series that's based on Dracula, and the lead is Vlad, and he's awful, and I love him. I don't know why I love him, because he does terrible, terrible things. So again, that's the sort of thing that I read, and I try to dissect it, like how has this author made me love this character who is so terrible? Why do I still find him attractive? And so I really try to learn from that and see if I can borrow some of that magic for my own characters. And there's a romance set in Russia during World War II. It's called The Bronze Horseman by Paulina Simons, and I love the male character in that. He is, yeah. I think if I had to pick one person to come to life, it might be him. But it's a tough choice. There's so many good ones. What about you guys? Out of my books, who would you choose as your book boyfriend? Oh, Cass.
Jackson from Candy Cane Challenge. Killian.
Oh, Noah, that's interesting. Okay. I mean, I love to
see as well. Oh. He's interested.
One of my favorite things, honestly, is talking to other people about my books is just to see the different way that people react to them. So the fact that people choose different men, and the fact that people have different books of mine that are their favorites, is so interesting to me. Just to try to figure out, why people connect with the story a certain way, why they connect with characters a certain way. And I asked I have a reader group on Facebook, and I asked recently, I asked people which of their books was my favorite. And I think somebody chose every single one of my books at least once. And that was really just incredible, because it makes me think that there's something in each of those books that is speaking to somebody. And, we're all bringing different experiences into our reading. We've all got our own lives. But if there's something in that somebody can latch onto that speaks to their own personal experience, as a writer, that's really the most fulfilling thing for me. Would I attempt writing a historical novel against a big historic event? Possibly. I do actually have an idea for a book. It's one that's been in the back of my head forever. But I'm a little bit hesitant to do something against real history, just because there is a much higher standard of being factually accurate when you do that. The story that I would like to tell. Okay, thanks, Emma. I'll talk to you later. I love Philippa Gregory's stories about the queens of England, the wives of Henry VIII. I find them really, really fascinating. And I would love to do a book like that looks at Russian history through the eyes of one of the empresses. Yes, and exactly. I'd have to do a ton of research on that. And being Russian, most of the source material is in Russian, which I do not speak. So that would be a challenge. But she's an absolutely fascinating character. She was a German princess who was brought in to be the wife of the son of Catherine the Great. And she was his second wife. He had been really in love with his first wife, but she died in childbirth. So she was brought in as a replacement. Her husband did not love her. She had this overbearing mother-in-law. But, she found her way. She found a place for herself. Eventually, her husband fell in love with this other woman. She actually became very good friends with his mistress and encouraged the relationship because it kept him happy. And then she was the mother of 3 different Russian emperors after her husband was assassinated. So I think she's got an absolutely fascinating story. She's not well known in the English-speaking world. And I think it would be really, really interesting to look at her life from a fictional perspective and what it must have been like for her to go through all of these major events as like a side player. She never really had a real role, but she was there through all of these things. So that is something I would love to do. I don't know even when I'm going to get time to do it, but it's definitely something that's been in the back of my head for a long time. So for you guys who are left here, is there any kind of book that you would like to see me write that I haven't taken on yet? Oh, that's a good question. What actors would portray Cass and Dee if Netflix wanted to make a movie? Oh, goodness. I really don't know. Who do you see as them? I watch so little TV and movies lately that it's hard for me to even say. Everyone I could think of would be too old.
Well, when you write these books, like what kind of movie or show comes to mind, or what other books come to mind if you read them? Like, I know that they're your own and they're original, but like there's the inspiration, if that makes any sense. I hope it made sense.
Yeah, for sure. So for Lady in Waiting, it was really just like the old historic romances, like the kind that came out in like the 80s with Fabio on the cover and that sort of thing. So
Okay.
I read a lot of those growing up, and so that really kind of inspired this story. But I think of Dee as a much more modern person than the kind of typical princesses that we see in those kind of books. She's much more take charge. So
Okay.
Personally, I love musical theater. So my ultimate goal would be to see one of my books become a musical. I would love that. If anyone out there is a composer wants to give that a shot.
Wasn't I see right here where they say young Russell Crowe?
Okay, yeah, I can see that.
Okay. Wasn't he in a musical like Les Mis? Or am I
He
thinking?
was, yes.
Okay, so there's a connection there. Are there any more questions you all would like to ask or anything else that you would like to discuss? We have like 14 minutes left, so. And if not, if Melody, if you don't have anything else to talk about, or is up to you.
Yeah, I think I've talked enough. Everybody's heard enough from me. Well, thank you very much for having me. It was really great to have that chat. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, no problem. Thank you. Thank you for wanting to do this. We appreciate you so much. Oh, okay. Well, if there's nothing else, then we'll go ahead and end it. And again, Melody, thank you so much for this. It was excellent chatting with you.
Great. Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Bye.